to rest in the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Take a slow breath, friend. Let the world go quiet a moment. Welcome to Male Revenge, where the men this world calls soft turn out to be the hardest of all. Tonight, a good man, alone in a quiet house, and a son-in-law who mistook his decency for weakness. So settle in. Some men are underestimated only once. Men like me are easy to rob. Not because we're weak, because we're proud. We built something honest, paid what we owed, never once cut a corner. And a man like that will lose a fortune before he admits he's been made a fool of in his own kitchen. The people who prey on us know this. They count on it. My son-in-law counted on it. He slid the folder across my kitchen table like he was handing me a gift. Brandon Cole had a smile that worked on most people. Warm, easy, ready before you were. But I spent 40 years across negotiating tables from men who smiled like that. And I learned to watch the eyes instead. Brandon's never came along for the ride. He sat in the chair my wife used to sit in, Carol's chair, by the window, untouched in 3 years, hands folded on top of that folder, waiting for me to lean in and reach for it. My daughter Sarah sat beside him, hands wrapped around a coffee mug she hadn't lifted in 20 minutes. She had her mother's eyes, and right then they watched me the way you watch somebody standing too close to a high edge. I looked at the folder. I looked at Brandon. Then I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip. He cleared his throat. "Ray," he said, "we put this together because we love you. Everything in here protects what you've worked for. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. Taken care of." He said it like a kindness. I heard it for exactly what it was. I told him it meant the world, and that I'd look it over. I shook his hand at the door, that grip pressing a little too hard. The way it always did. Like he needed me to feel he was the stronger man, and watched their taillights vanish around the corner. Then I went inside, sat at this same table, and looked at that folder a long time without touching it. Understand something. I wasn't confused. I wasn't afraid. I was thinking about a Tuesday morning in 1984 loading freight onto a truck in South Houston, soaked through before 7, swearing this was not where my story ended. That picture is what $1.2 million actually looks like. Not a number on a wire transfer. 40 years of hard mornings and harder decisions. Every one of them mine. I set the folder aside. I already knew what was in it. I came up with nothing. My father worked the refineries until they used him up. Money wasn't dinner table talk. You had it, or you went and earned it. So I earned it. I drove trucks, studied accounting at night while men my age closed down bars. Never the smartest man in a room. Just stubborn and quietly proud of needing no one, which turned out to be worth more than smart. It also turned out, a long time later, to be the most dangerous thing about me. At 31, I went in as junior partner with Ed Weston, 60, a lifetime in freight, a quiet integrity you earned your way toward. We built it slow and clean, walked from contracts when the terms stank. There were lean years I drove home wondering if I'd called it wrong. I hadn't, not once. When Ed retired, I bought him out. 2 years later, I sold the whole thing to a Dallas carrier for $1.2 million. No ceremony. A handshake, a wire transfer, a quiet drive home. Carol was waiting at the kitchen door when I pulled in. She had on that blue dress, the one she saved for the days she wanted to feel like something. She didn't say a word. She came down the 2 porch steps and put her arms around me, and I held my wife and thought about that freight yard and every mile between then and her. That night she made pot roast from scratch. the kind that takes all afternoon. And we sat at this table 3 hours and talked about what came next. About the trip to Maine we'd always put off. About how, finally, we'd have the time. We never took that trip. 3 years after that handshake in Dallas, Carol was gone. Pancreatic cancer. 7 months from the word to the end. I was 61, and I'd have signed over every dollar to have her back in that blue dress. She met Brandon before she got sick. Shook his hand once. Said almost nothing about him. I thought she was saving her strength. I know better now. After we buried her, Sarah married him. Brandon Cole. Financial advisor. Firm handshake. And now he sat in Carol's chair and slid a folder across my table like he was doing me a favor. I picked it up. I read the first page. I set it back down. Outside, a mockingbird was singing in the oak tree Carol planted the year we moved in. The coffee had gone cold. The house was quiet the particular way it only gets when you're the last one left standing in it. Carol always knew people before I did. She'd have known what to do with that folder. So did I, at least. That's what I told myself. And here's the part I'll give you straight, because nothing after it makes sense otherwise. The same stubbornness that built everything I own, that bull-headed habit of carrying every hard thing myself, of never asking another soul for help, is the very thing that almost handed Brandon all of it. I beat him in the end, but I came nearer to losing than any man should, and not because he was clever, because I was proud, and pride had been my blind spot for 64 years, and I never once saw it. I'd seen this coming a long time, and I had not spent that time sitting still. Sitting still was never my trouble. My trouble was that I'd spent a lifetime sure I could carry anything alone, and I was about to learn, in this kitchen, how wrong a careful man can be about the one thing he never thinks to question. The first time Brandon Cole shook my hand, he held it a beat too long. It's a small thing, but I spent 40 years shaking hands across tables where millions changed sides, and I know what one's supposed to be. 2 men equals. Brandon's was a sentence he'd already measured me. Sarah had been seeing him 3 months when she brought him to the house. She was 29, ran the billing office at a West Side clinic, and she walked into a room the way her mother did, like she already knew where she was going. And because I loved my daughter more than I trusted my own gut, I told the gut to sit down and be quiet. Carol was still with us then. This was before the word pancreatic, before any of it. She cooked, set the good table, and watched Brandon all evening with that still, patient look, the one she got reading something nobody else could see. Brandon was good. I'll give him that for free. 32, just up from Atlanta, a senior advisor at a firm downtown, well-dressed without shouting about it. He asked the right questions, laughed in the right places, talked about his work with real warmth. The clients that broke his heart, he said, were the proud ones, the men who'd built everything themselves and never once asked a soul for help. Those are the ones who go down quietest, he said, shaking his head. They'd rather lose every dime than let their kids see they slipped. Won't say a word till it's too late to fix. He looked genuinely sorrowful. Somebody's got to look out for men like that. They sure won't do it themselves. I passed him the bread and agreed that somebody did, after he left. Carol dried dishes beside me at the sink. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, quiet, not looking up from the plate in her hands. She said, "Watch the way that boy holds on when he shakes your hand. Ray." And before I could answer, she'd changed the subject to the weather, and never raised it again. I told myself it was nothing. Carol noticed everything. That was just Carol. I let it go. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. I've thought about the dinner one even more. They got engaged 14 months later. Somewhere in that stretch, the word pancreatic walked into our kitchen and took the floor out from under us. 7 months. By the time Sarah married him, small ceremony, her mother was 3 months in the ground. And I walked my daughter down that aisle alone and tried not to think about who should have been on the other side of me. At the reception, Brandon found me at the bar, put a hand on my shoulder, leaned in, and said, low, just for me, Ray, taking care of Sarah is the most important thing in my life. I'm going to do right by her. Always. Exactly the right words. Landed exactly where he aimed them. And I stood there with my club soda thinking about Ed Weston, who in 30 years never once told me he was honest. He just was. Men who lead with their integrity rarely feel the need to announce it. I shook Brandon's hand. That same handshake. That same extra beat. 6 months after the wedding, he started asking about my money. It never comes at you straight with a man like Brandon. It came wrapped in a dinner invitation, good wine, and a story a client named Gerald, a retired math teacher, sharp his whole life. Then he started getting confused about his accounts. Brandon said, shaking his head slow and sad. Couldn't remember which bills he'd paid. By the time the family caught it, he was nearly wiped out. He looked at me when he finished. Not long, just a glance. Just enough. 2 weeks later, he was at my house, helping me sort tax documents, his idea, not mine, and came up holding 2 statements from the same utility. 6 days apart. Ray, he said gently. Did you pay this bill twice? I hadn't. One was a current statement. One was last month's payment confirmation. Standard paper. Any man who's run his own books for 40 years knows the difference at a glance. And here is where the whole thing turned, though Brandon never felt it. Because I was watching his face when he asked, and what I saw wasn't worry. It was patience. The patience of a man running a play he'd run before. Gerald. The slow headshake. The single glance. It was a script. And a script means there were others before me. That was the moment I stopped being a worried old man. I looked down at the statements and let my face go uncertain. I let him see exactly what he came for. Maybe I did, I said. Hard to keep it all straight some days. His eyes moved. Just a flicker. The quiet satisfaction of a man who thinks a door has cracked open. He had no idea he'd just told me he was a thief. Worse, a practiced one. I helped Sarah with the dishes the way I used to. I thanked Brandon for his time and watched their taillights go. Then I went to my desk, took out a yellow notepad, and wrote down every strange thing Brandon Cole had said or done since the day he held my hand too long. 3 pages. I read them twice, and here's what I didn't see then, though he'd drawn me the map himself over that first dinner. I didn't call Sarah. I didn't call a lawyer. I told no one. I folded the notepad into the bottom drawer and decided, the way I'd decided everything for 40 years, to handle it myself on my own, on my terms. The proud man who built it alone, the one who tells nobody. The surest feeling in the world, and the first step onto the exact ground he'd marked for me, walked by a man certain he was the hunter. Then I picked up the phone and called my daughter, to tell her what a wonderful evening it had been. 3 pages became 5. 5 became 8. Inside 2 months, the yellow notepad held 12, and I kept it in the bottom drawer of my desk under a folder of dead contracts where no one would think to look. Brandon had a system. I could see it the way I used to see slack in a logistics chain, not all at once, but pattern by pattern, until the whole shape stood up out of the noise. He was patient. He never pushed too hard in any one conversation. He planted, then stepped back, and let time do the watering. The stories came first. A retired professor who'd signed power of attorney over to the wrong man. A widower who'd wired his savings to a charity that didn't exist. A former executive whose grown children had to step in reluctantly. Brandon always added, but it was the right call in the end. He never looked straight at me when he told them. He aimed a few inches to my left, the way a man does when he's careful not to be caught aiming at all. Then the questions. How were my investments holding up in this market? Had I looked at my retirement allocations lately? Did I have someone I trusted to give an old man objective advice at his stage of life? Reasonable, everyone. All of them walking towards something I couldn't yet see the edges of. Sarah started changing in the 3rd month. It came on slow, the way real things do. She called twice a week instead of once. She asked how I was sleeping, whether I was eating right, whether I'd kept up with my doctor. Good questions for a daughter to ask. But there was a new thread under them, a low hum of worry that hadn't been there before, and I knew exactly whose hand had put it there. One Sunday, she came alone and sat across from me with a coffee she barely touched. "Dad," she said, "I just want you to know if it ever starts to feel like too much. Brandon and I are here. We only want to take the pressure off you." I set my own cup down very carefully, because I had heard those words before. Take the pressure off. That was Brandon's phrase. Brandon's cadence, coming out of my daughter's mouth in my daughter's voice. She didn't even seem to know it wasn't hers, and that was the thing that frightened me more than the notepad, more than the folder that would come later. I sat there looking at the girl who used to do her homework at this same table while her mother made dinner, and I could not tell which Sarah I was talking to, the one being slowly talked out of her own judgment, or the one who had already been talked into something and didn't want to look at it square. I didn't push. You don't. When you don't yet know which way someone will fall. I told her I was fine. I walked her to the porch and hugged her and watched her go. Then I added 2 lines to the notepad. One of them was her name. I sat looking at it a long time before I closed the drawer. By the 5th month, Brandon had stopped circling and started landing. He brought printed articles to dinner now and set them by my plate like he was passing the salt a piece on estate planning in your 60s. Another on cognitive changes in older adults and financial decision-making. He had a favorite phrase, and he used it the way other men use a crowbar. Safety net. It made robbery sound like love, and he'd found himself a clock. "There's a clean window to set this up," he said one evening. Easy as weather. Tax-wise, it's smartest before the new year. After that, it gets complicated. I'd hate for you to lose the advantage just because we waited. So now there was a deadline. 6 weeks, maybe 7. He'd built himself a reason to push, and dressed it up as doing me a favor. "Someone should really help you stay on top of all this. Ray," he said. "Take the weight off. Someone you trust." The November light was going orange and flat through the window. The honest kind this city gets in late fall. "Someone like you," I said. He smiled. "Well, if you're comfortable with that." "Yes. Absolutely." I let a pause open the kind that makes a man think you're turning it over. Let me think about it. His eyes moved. Just a flicker. I'd spent 40 years reading faces across tables, and I knew that flicker. It wasn't concern, and it wasn't patience. It was a man who believes he's just watched a door start to swing. That night I sat at my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and turned to a clean page. At the top I wrote one word, plan, and then I sat there. Because the truth was I had the will and not the way. I knew what Brandon was. I knew there were others before me. But knowing a man is a thief and proving it to the people who love him are two different mountains. And I was 64 years old, standing at the bottom of both, assuming, the way I always had, that I'd climb them by myself. I couldn't sleep. The house had that December quiet that gets down into your chest. After a while I gave up, walked down the hall, and went into the bedroom to Carol's side of it, the side I mostly left alone. I opened her bedside drawer for the first time in years. Hand lotion she'd used every night. A bookmark and a mystery she never finished. Her reading glasses in their soft blue case. A photograph of the two of us, laughing at something I can no longer name. And underneath all of it, my fingers closed on something I didn't expect. Small, hard-cornered, bound in dark green. I sat down on the edge of the bed with the green notebook in my hands and did not open it for a long moment. It was the drugstore kind, a couple of dollars. Carol kept notebooks her whole life, grocery lists, garden notes, things she didn't want to lose. I knew her handwriting better than my own. I'd just never known about this one. I opened it. The first pages were ordinary, and that almost undid me. Phone numbers for contractors she'd meant to call. A recipe for a soup she wanted to try. Notes from a doctor's appointment in the careful shorthand she used when she wanted to remember exactly what was said. Her writing was the same as it always was, small, precise, tilted a little to the right, and reading it was like hearing her voice come from the next room. I read slow. There was no reason to hurry. She was gone either way. Toward the middle, the entries turned personal. The way the October light fell across the backyard one morning. Something Sarah said on the phone that made her laugh. And then a line that stopped me cold, a reminder to herself, to tell me she was proud of the man I'd become. She'd underlined it. Beside it, she'd written, "Do not forget this one." She dated it a Tuesday in September. I remembered that Tuesday. Nothing happened on it. We ate supper. We watched the news. I never knew she'd been carrying that, waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. She never got the moment. I sat with that page until my hands stopped being steady. Then I turned to the next one. And something in my chest went very quiet. At the top of the page, she had written one word, the way she titled things when she wanted to think them through clearly. Brandon. She dated it 14 months before she died. 11 months before any doctor said the word that ended us. Almost a year before I'd ever sat at my desk with a yellow notepad. My wife had already been keeping one of her own. I read every word. She'd seen exactly what I'd seen. She had it down in that calm, exact hand of hers, the handshake that held too long. The questions about money dressed up as concern but angled, always toward an answer. The sad stories about helpless old people, told with his eyes set just off to the side. She had noticed the eyes. Of course she had. She noticed everything. "He is building something," she wrote, "and I do not know yet what it is." And 2 lines below, in the same steady hand, "Whatever it is, Ray will need to be careful." I read those 2 sentences 3 times. Then I saw the part that took the air out of me. She hadn't only watched, she'd been testing it, the way I'd later learned to. He tells the same kind of story too many times. She'd written, the professor, the widower, the man whose children took over, different names, same shape, like he's done this before and is practicing on us. Like there's a version of it that already worked somewhere else. Like he's done this before. My wife wrote that. A year before I caught the same scent. She'd already smelled the thing a lawyer would spend weeks proving that there were others. And then a question arrived, uninvited, and would not leave. Brandon met Sarah 11 months before any of us knew Carol was sick. Carol had started watching him almost the moment he walked in. I sat there on the edge of the bed and made myself ask it. Plainly, had this man fallen for my daughter, or had he found her, a young woman with a father who just sold a company for a fortune, and a mother who wouldn't be around much longer to sound the alarm? I couldn't prove that thought. I still can't. But once it was in the room, it never fully left. The last entry about Brandon was short. 2 weeks after the first. She'd written, I need to talk to Ray about this. I'm going to wait until I know more. And then, smaller, lower, as if she'd added it later. Unsure she should. I hope I'm wrong. She never got to talk to me. The word pancreatic came, and everything else got swept off the table, and the green notebook went into a drawer I wouldn't open for 4 years. She'd seen him clear, the way she saw everything, and written it down so she wouldn't lose it, and then time ran out with the most important thing still unsaid. I held the notebook against my chest and sat in the dark a long while. A car went by on the street and threw its lights across the ceiling and was gone. I could hear myself breathing. I thought about that night at the sink, watched the way that boy holds on, and how I'd told her it was nothing. She had handed me the first page of all this with her own mouth, and I'd let it fall. That was mine to carry. I'd carry it, but somewhere in the dark, the grief took on a harder edge, because Carol hadn't only left me a warning, she'd left me a map. She'd already found the road I needed the others, the ones before me, the proof that this was a pattern and not a misunderstanding. I'd had the will and no way. She had handed me the way from the far side of 4 years and a closed drawer. I set the notebook on the nightstand where I could see it. I walked down the hall to my desk and picked up the yellow notepad. This time I knew exactly what to write. I wrote one line at the top, and it was a question. And answering it would take me all the way to a kitchen table in Dallas and a man named Harold I hadn't met yet. Were there others? In the morning, I would call my lawyer and find out. I called Marcus Webb at 8 the next morning, before the coffee finished brewing. Marcus had been my attorney for 11 years. 66. 2 ahead of me. So deliberate you felt he'd played out every branch of a talk before opening his mouth. He'd handled my contracts, my estate, the company sale. He knew how I thought, and how to listen without jumping in. I told him all of it, the folder, the 5 months in the yellow notepad, the articles by my plate, the utility bill test, the invented deadline, and the green notebook in Carol's drawer, what my wife had written a year before she got sick. When I finished, Marcus was quiet a while. "You want my first piece of advice," he said finally. "It's the one you'll like least. Go on. Don't throw him out. Don't say a word to him. Don't even let your face change at the next dinner." That was exactly what I'd wanted since I closed that notebook drive to Sarah's. Put Brandon against a wall. Tell him I knew. I told Marcus as much. "I understand the urge," he said. "But the minute he knows you see him, he adjusts. That's the whole danger of him. Right now, you've got the one thing he can't plan around. He thinks you're slipping. Let him keep thinking it. A pause. An old man who looks beaten is the most dangerous man in the room. Ray, as long as he's only pretending. That's why I'd called Marcus. Not some younger lawyer who'd tell me to act fast and feel righteous. The worst thing you can do to a trap is spring it early. By 40 minutes end, I had a direction. Then I went to work the way I had my whole life by controlling what I could control. It's a fine way to run a freight company. I hadn't yet learned what it costs a man who tries to run his family, his enemies, and the whole turning world the same way. I changed every lock not because I thought Brandon would break in, but to know exactly who could come and go. Then I bought 3 small recorders, flat ones that vanish against a surface, and placed them one in the living room lamp base, one in a ceramic bookend by the kitchen, one in the hollow base of the mantel clock. Every chair Brandon liked. I gave a witness. It felt strange, wiring my own house like a man expecting a crime. Then I'd look at the green notebook on the nightstand. And it didn't. Marcus called back 4 days later. "Sit down," he said. I told him I already was. He'd done what good lawyers do when a thing smells bigger than it looks. Pulled records, called colleagues, reached a contact at the state bar who tracked complaints. What he'd found wasn't a greedy son-in-law working an old man. It was a pattern. Austin. An elderly couple put their money into an investment Brandon recommended. When they needed it, they couldn't reach it. By the time it untangled, the husband had passed and the wife had stopped fighting. San Antonio, a retired teacher, signed documents she didn't understand. Lost most of her savings for over a year. Both times, Brandon was gone before anyone could prove intent. And both times, Marcus slowed. They were too ashamed to make any noise. There it was. The quiet engine the whole thing ran on. Not the forged paper. Not the smooth talk, the shame. A man robbed of his money will sometimes fight. A man robbed of his judgment, made to feel a fool in front of his children, mostly goes quiet and hopes nobody finds out. Brandon didn't only steal from these people. He sealed their mouths with the theft itself. Whatever the bar had was a fraction of the truth, and every silence had helped make the next one possible. "There's one more," Marcus said. His voice changed just enough that I caught it. "This is the one I need you to hear." I waited. Harold Simmons, 71, retired engineer, Dallas, 38 years with one firm, never missed a payment in his life. Brandon found him 2 years ago slid into a legitimate investment group to reach men like Harold. Over 6 months, he moved nearly all of Harold's retirement into accounts he held. By the time the son understood, the money was gone, structured so it couldn't be clawed back. Marcus paused. There were filings, investigations. The machinery did everything it's built to do. And it crawled. And Harold was 71. And it had been everything he had. He died 8 months after they emptied him out. The doctor wrote cardiac arrest. His son calls it something else. The kitchen was very quiet. The coffee I'd poured had gone cold. Out the window, the oak stood bare in the December light. That was the part that put the cold all the way through me. Not that the system had ignored Harold. That it hadn't. The filings were filed. The investigations opened. Every gear turned exactly as designed, slow, correct, and useless, and a careful, honest man died with nothing anyway. Since the notebook, I'd told myself that if I was smart enough and fast enough, I could get out ahead of this. Harold was Marcus telling me, gently, that smart and fast aren't always enough, that some of the people you set out to help are already past any hand's reach, and you don't get to choose which. I sat a long time without moving. I'd been carrying this as mine, my money, my house, my independence, and it was all of those. But bigger than all of them, and I just met how much bigger. I didn't feel angry. Anger would have been simple and clean and over fast. What I felt was colder, the thing I'd feel late in a long negotiation, when I understood the other side had been lying since the first handshake, and everything after was making sure they didn't walk away with it. I picked the phone back up. There's more work to do," I said. "But before any of it, I'm driving to Dallas. I need to look his son in the eye. It's 3.5 hours from Houston to Dallas on a good day. I left before sunrise on a Thursday, 2 days after Marcus said the name Harold Simmons, and didn't tell a soul where I was going. Marcus had given me an address, Daniel Simmons, Harold's son, north of Dallas. I could have gathered the facts by phone and saved the gas. But some things you can't take in over a telephone. I'd carried Harold 2 days and needed a face to go with him. Daniel opened the door before I knocked his father's build, and the tiredness that settles into a man who's held something heavy too long and not been let set it down. He led me to the kitchen and poured 2 cups without asking. I told him who I was and why I'd come. He listened without interrupting, which told me something about the man who'd raised him. When I finished, he was quiet a moment. My father was the most careful man I ever knew. He said it the way you state a fact that still surprises you 2 years on. He built his life the way he built bridges, slow, square, no shortcuts. Set aside money every month from the time he was 27, because he'd decided young he'd take care of himself and never be a weight on anybody. Daniel looked into his coffee. That's the part that broke him, not the money, the idea of it. He spent his whole life making sure he'd never need anybody's help, and somebody took it from him anyway. I kept my face still, but the words went into me sideways. Never need anybody. Take care of yourself, so you're never a burden on a soul. I'd said versions of that my whole life and called it character. In Daniel's kitchen, I heard it the way a thief hears it, an open window. Harold and I were the same man. The only thing between his chair by the window and mine was that Carol had left me a notebook, and no one had left him one. "Did anybody try to fight it?" I asked. "I did." He almost smiled. No humor in it. "Police. 2 lawyers. The group that introduced them. Every door. The same answer your father signed all of it. By his own hand." He pressed his thumb into a ring of water the cup had left and watched it spread. "That's the trick, Mr. Hutchins. By the time it's done, the victim looks like a volunteer. Nobody I went to could even see a crime, just a grown man's signatures and a son who couldn't accept his father's choices. For a year I was told, kindly, that there was no victim here. While my father sat in that chair and came apart, I sat with that. It told me what I'd need. Paper wouldn't be enough. Signatures wouldn't be enough. I'd need Brandon's own voice, saying out loud what he meant to do, before he ever put a pen in my hand. And he's not rare, Daniel said. That's the part nobody warns you about. After Dad, I went looking. There are more of them than anyone counts, in every city, sitting quiet in their own chairs by their own windows, each sure he's the only fool it ever happened to. For everyone somebody pulls out in time. There's a row of them nobody ever reaches. He was ashamed, I said. For a while he half defended. The man said maybe he'd misunderstood. He couldn't stand to have been fooled. So he argued against the people trying to help him. Daniel's jaw worked. At the end, he stopped talking about it. Every morning he'd sit in that chair and stare at the yard, like a man working a problem with no solution. He was an engineer. He thought in errors and corrections. And he couldn't accept that he'd made no error, that there was nothing to fix, that it had simply been done to him. He looked up at me 3 weeks before he died. We were sitting right here, this time of evening. He looked at me and said, "Daniel, I did everything right. I did everything right. I don't understand." His voice stayed level, the way a voice goes worn smooth from too much handling. And I had nothing to say to him. I didn't have anything either. There's no sentence in the language that would have been enough. We sat a while. The light outside went the color of ash. I knew that wound. I'd missed Carol's warning while she was alive to give it, and spent 4 years not knowing. Daniel had been across the state and missed his father going under 3 feet away. 2 men carrying the same stone. Nobody who hasn't carried it can tell you what it weighs. I thanked him, told him what I was doing, and that I'd keep him in it. He walked me to the door, shook my hand, and held on a beat longer than a handshake needs, and I thought, of all things, of Brandon's grip, the one that pressed too hard to remind you who was stronger. This was the opposite, a man holding on because he had no words, and didn't want to let go of the only person in 2 years who'd taken his father seriously. I drove south into the dark. The lights of Dallas slid into my mirror and went out, and there was nothing ahead but highway and night. Harold Simmons rode home with me the whole way. Not his ghost, his story. A careful man in a chair by a window, telling himself he'd done everything right. He had, and it hadn't saved him. Neither would careful save me, I understood that now. The one thing that might was the thing Harold never got to reach for. I wasn't going to face it alone. I was going to make sure my story didn't end in that chair, and that the man who put Harold in his answered for every morning he spent there. The first time I made myself forget something in front of Brandon. It cost me more than I expected. Not guilt, exactly. Closer to spending money you'd saved your whole life for no good reason. I'd been 64 years a man whose word was worth something. Every deal I made stood on it. Pretending, at my own table, to lose the thread of a sentence was me reaching into the one account I'd never touched and handing it to a thief. But I'd seen Harold's chair by the window, so I did what needed doing. It was a Sunday in January. Brandon mentioned a filing deadline in March. I let 5 minutes pass and asked, easy as anything, when he'd said it was. He told me. A few minutes later, I asked again. He set down his fork and looked at me the way a man looks when the first number on a lock clicks into place. Did I already ask that? I said, with just enough embarrassment in it. You did, he said, gentle as a nurse. It's all right. Sarah's hand came across the table and covered mine. And that not Brandon. Not the recorder in the lamp base 3 feet away. That's the part I'll answer for someday. The grief in my daughter's face was real. Planted weeks ago by a careful man and blooming now in soil I was watering with my own 2 hands. Afterward, Brandon found me alone, a hand on my shoulder, voice low and warm. These things happen to the best of us, he said. No shame in it. He and Sarah would make sure I was looked after. Always. The recorder got every soft, rotten word. I kept it small after that, a question twice. A name let slip mid-sentence. He wasn't hunting facts. He was hunting confirmation. And confirmation is easy to hand a man who's made up his mind. That was the trap I didn't see myself building. Every time I played the part, I left a fingerprint, a witness, a memory, proof the old man was slipping. I thought I was loading a gun for Brandon. I never once stopped to ask whose hand it would end up in. He began mentioning a document, something to protect me. He said, if a day came when decisions got hard, then once, lightly, he added the line that should have stopped me cold. And if it ever came to it, Ray, there are ways to keep a man protected that don't even need his signature. The courts do it for families all the time. Nobody wants that, but it's there. I told him I'd think about it. I was getting a great deal of practice saying that. Marcus called the second week of February. 2 new ones so far. He said both men past 60, both alone, both sitting on real money. The same slow opening. Then the part I'd been waiting for. And it landed lighter than I'd hoped. The FBI knows him. Fraud division, here in Houston. But Ray, their file is thinner than yours. Austin won't testify. San Antonio won't testify. Shame keeps them quiet. And on paper, every one of those people signed willingly. They've had Brandon 8 months, and they've got next to nothing that holds. They're not riding to anybody's rescue. If anything, they're hoping somebody hands them a case. A pause. An agent named Torres will meet you. Don't expect cavalry. We sat down 2 days later in Marcus's office. Sandra Torres was early 40s, calm the way of someone who's heard 1,000 stories and learned to let each finish. She didn't pretend to be glad to see me. I'll be straight with you. I don't love putting a 64-year-old in the middle of an active fraud. And those recordings you've been making, a defense lawyer will spend a week trying to throw every one of them out how you got them. Whether you led him into it. They help me. They don't save me. What saves me is Brandon, in his own voice. Laying the whole thing out where he's sure he's private, clean enough no judge can wave it away. My kitchen, I said. Your kitchen. With you looking like a man who's already lost. She didn't soften it. He won't say the whole of it until he's sure he's won. To get the words. You let him get closer to your money and your daughter than is going to feel safe. I can't wire you. I can't promise you protection. And if it goes wrong in your house. With your name on it. Marcus had been quiet. Now he leaned in. There's a worse version, Ray, and you need to hear it. You've spent 2 months building a record that you're failing. If Brandon decides forged paper is too risky, he doesn't need it. He files for a conservatorship, a petition, a friendly judge, protective guardianship. Your performance is his Exhibit A. Sarah's worry is his Exhibit B. He'd take everything through the front door of a courthouse. Legal as Sunday. No forgery left to catch him on. You'd have handed it to him yourself. I shook my head. He wants the money. And he wants it fast. Courts are slow. He won't bother. Marcus looked at me a long moment. I hope you're right. I thought about Harold in the passenger seat. About Carol's small, tilted hand. About Daniel holding on at the door. You need someone he trusts, I said. Someone he believes is exactly where he wants him. That's the easiest part of this whole thing. I am that man. Torres studied me like she couldn't decide whether that was confidence or something closer to pride. I didn't help her decide. I'd already made up my mind, my own way, the way I always had, and I walked out of that office having set Marcus's warning down gently on the table behind me, unread. The last time I'd done that with a warning, it had been Carol's, at a kitchen sink, about a handshake. I'd told myself that one was nothing, too. Sarah came by alone on a Wednesday in late February, 3 days after I sat across from Agent Torres. She didn't call first. I heard her key turn in the lock, the copy I hadn't asked back when I changed all the others. I'd left it on purpose, whatever else was true. I wanted my daughter able to walk into my house. She stood in the doorway before she said anything. She looked tired, not the tired of a long week, but the kind that sits behind the eyes and won't wash out with sleep. I made 2 sandwiches, poured 2 iced teas, and we sat the way we'd been sitting at tables together since she was 7. For a while we talked about nothing that mattered, which is to say everything: the garden, the clinic, a documentary we'd argued over separately, the kind of talk that costs nothing and is worth more than you know until it's gone. Then she set down her glass. "Dad, are you okay? Really okay?" And she looked at me, and there it was. Her mother's look. Carol used to study me that way, seeing past whatever I'd arranged on my face to what was under it. Sarah had it too, or she used to, before Brandon spent a year talking her out of trusting her own eyes. For a second it was all the way back. I told her I was tired but fine. True enough to keep from being a lie. She nodded, turned her glass a slow half circle. And then she said the thing I've turned over 1,000 times. "Brandon wants me to sign some papers," she said. "As next of kin. He says it just makes things official, so if a day came when you couldn't manage, somebody who loves you could step in." She still wasn't looking at me. "He says it'd take the weight off all of us." I kept my face still. Take the weight off, Brandon's phrase, wearing my daughter's voice. But it was the rest that put a cold hand on my neck. Papers. Next of kin. Somebody could step in. Marcus's warning came back word for word. The thing he'd told me to fear wasn't coming someday. It was at my kitchen table, asking my daughter to hold the pen. I couldn't tell, even then. "That's the part I can't make clean for you." I looked at my own child and could not say which one she was, the daughter being slowly robbed of her own judgment, or the one already half-talked into signing her father's competence away and telling herself it was love. Both readings fit. They've fit ever since. "I want you to know something," she said, quieter now. "Whatever gets decided, I love you, and I'm on your side. On my side." She believed it, that was the worst of it. In her mind, being on my side and reaching for that pen had become the same act. I could have told her everything then. The notebook, Harold, Torres, the recorders in the room. For one breath I wanted to. Badly enough that I had to hold the edge of the table. I didn't. If I told her, she'd take it straight to Brandon, not from malice, but because she still trusted him more than her own eyes, and he'd be gone before I had a word of him on tape. I told her I knew. I told her I loved her too. She left an hour later, and I watched her go. From behind, she was Carol, the same shoulders, the same way of carrying herself, like the wind couldn't push her. I stood there a long time after. Then I went back to work. Faster now, because the clock had a face on it. The weeks that followed were the most disciplined of my life. Every dinner documented, every call, every time Brandon let himself in, more and more as he grew sure of his ground. He pushed with both hands now the friendly papers for Sarah, and a simpler set for me, for when I was ready. He'd decided I was far enough gone to hurry. He was wrong. But I needed him to believe it with his whole chest. Torres and I spoke twice a week. The case thickened and stayed fragile at once, still pointing at a man careful enough never to say out loud the one thing that would end him. Marcus came on a Tuesday in April with a folder twice as thick. The recordings, the financial trail, Austin and San Antonio, documented. 2 new victims with guarded statements. He closed it. "We can move," he said. "It's thin, and a good lawyer could hurt us. But it's enough to file, and you should know Sarah hasn't signed his papers yet. She hasn't said no, either. If she signs, the conservatorship grows legs and you'll be fighting to prove you're sane while half the evidence against you is a performance you put on yourself." He let that land. "Every day you wait, you're betting she holds out." "Not yet," I said. Marcus waited. I need him to say all of it, out loud, in this house, in his own voice with Sarah in the room. What, you'd risk the conservatorship. You'd risk everything to make her listen. "A recording convicts him," I said. "It won't free her. Tearing up one paper won't stop her signing the next he hands her. Nothing stops her, and nothing frees her. But hearing what that man truly thinks of her in his own voice, before she signs, with no way left to explain it away." Marcus studied me a long moment. Then he nodded. "Once." "Understood. I hope she holds out long enough." He didn't say the rest, and neither did I that I was gambling the case, the money, and my competence in a court's eyes, for a truth she might never thank me for. I was out past the edge Torres had warned me about, and somewhere across town a petition was being drawn up with my name on it, waiting on a single signature. I was going to find out which daughter I'd raised, and I was going to find out before a judge did. I read Carol's notebook for the 3rd time on the Tuesday evening before everything happened. The first time I'd read it in disbelief, the second in grief. The third was something harder to name, closer to gratitude. But the kind that costs you. The kind you feel when you understand the person who loved you most also saw you most clearly. All the way down. And chose to stay anyway. I didn't skip the ordinary pages. The contractor numbers, the soup, the note about the October light on the backyard. I read all of it, because she'd written all of it. I stopped, the way I always stopped now, at the entry where she'd reminded herself to tell me she was proud of the man I'd become. Do not forget this one, and that one pulled an old day up out of me. Spring of 1994. The company was 2 years old and carrying more debt than I could sleep on. A supplier we'd worked with for years was drowning and owed us money he plainly couldn't pay. I had 2 roads: call the debt hard and recover most of it and put his shop in the ground, or carve out a payment plan that would squeeze us for a year and give the man a chance to live. I took the payment plan. Ed Weston told me I was wrong. Our accountant told me I was wrong. On the paper in front of them, they were right. I came home and told Carol. Braced for her to worry, she balanced us to the dollar. She listened to the whole thing. Then she got up, came around the table, took my face in both her hands, and said, "That is exactly why I married you." I sat in the lamplight and let that day stand in the room with me. The man in that kitchen in 1994 who'd chosen people over paper and never once regretted it. I didn't know yet that paper was coming for me now, with my own daughter's name signed at the bottom of it. I set the notebook on the nightstand where I could see it. "I hear you," I said, out loud, to the empty room. 20 minutes later, the phone rang. Marcus, and not with logistics. "He filed this morning," he said. He didn't soften it. Marcus never softened the things that couldn't be. "A petition for conservatorship, emergency protective grounds. There's a hearing set 18 days out." I sat very still. There it was. The warning I'd set down unread in his office. The one I'd waved off because I was so certain he wants it fast. Courts are slow. He won't bother. He'd bothered. While I was congratulating myself on reading him, Brandon had read me better and walked straight through the door my own pride had left standing open. 40 years certain I could read any man across a table. I'd read this one wrong on the only thing that mattered, too proud to believe a careful man could be out-carefuled by a thief in a cheap suit. Marcus had handed me that warning in plain words, and I'd set it down the way I'd set down Carol's at the sink. I was getting very good at not hearing the people who loved me. "There's more," Marcus said. Torres pulled the records. Brandon sent Sarah the petition 10 days ago, asked her to sign as next of kin. She wrote back asking whether it meant you'd lose control of your own affairs. He said only the parts you couldn't handle. She asked whether you'd be told. He said it was kinder if you weren't not at first. Marcus paused. She didn't answer for 4 hours. Ray. 4 hours. And then she signed it. The room went very quiet. I could hear the oak moving against the side of the house. She'd asked the 3 questions a person asks when some part of them already knows the answer. Then she'd gone silent for 4 hours. Then she'd put her name under a document asking a judge to rule that her father had lost his mind. And the proof they'd wave at that hearing the confused old man asking the same thing twice I'd built myself. For exactly this. What came wasn't the clean anger I'd half expected, the kind you can pick up and swing. It was slower and worse. The grief of watching someone you love stand in front of a door she knew led somewhere wrong, and walk through it anyway. Because not knowing was easier than the fight. Carol had written, "I hope I'm wrong in that notebook," about Brandon, a year before she ran out of time. Marcus had told me, "I hope you're right," 3 weeks ago, about a courthouse. They'd been talking about the same thing, and tonight I was on the wrong side of both. "Okay," I said finally, into the line. Marcus waited. "She's still in the room tomorrow." "That doesn't change." A pause. "Ray, she's the petitioner now. She's already moved against you. You want the woman trying to have you declared incompetent sitting at your table when you spring this." "Yes." Because I understood it now in a way I hadn't an hour before. A daughter signs that paper in the dark, believing it's love. The only thing on this earth that pulls her back before a judge makes it real is to put her in that room and let her hear, in his own voice, what the man she signed for actually thinks of her. No 4 hours to hide in. No okay to type. She had to be there. She, most of all, understood. Marcus said. 18 days. I hope to God you know what you're doing. I set the phone down. I sat while the gray outside went to black. Some wounds cut deeper than others. I learned that the morning a doctor said pancreatic in this house, and I was learning it again tonight, and learning, on top of it, that the deepest cut of all is the one your own certainty hands you. Tomorrow it would end, one way or the other. Then the phone lit up in the dark and began to ring again. The phone lit up at 10:47 and Brandon's name was on it. I'd been sitting in the dark a while by then, in the stillness that comes over a man when a thing he's managed for months turns its last corner. I let it ring twice. Then I answered, Ray. Smooth, warm. The voice he always used. Sorry for the late call. Wanted to talk before tomorrow. I said it was no trouble. I said I was just sitting up. I'll be straight with you. Because I respect you. A pause. Well placed. I filed a petition today. A conservatorship. I hated to, but Sarah and I have been worried a long while. And my lawyer said waiting wasn't kind to anyone. Another pause. Here's the thing. There's a hearing in a few weeks, strangers. A judge. Questions you shouldn't have to sit through at your age. None of it has to happen. You come in tomorrow, sign the accounts into the protected structure, and I withdraw the petition that same afternoon. No hearing, no fuss. Family handling family. There it was, laid out clean. The stick and the apple, held in one hand. Sign willingly, and he'd spare me the courtroom he'd built to frighten me into signing. He'd filed against his own father-in-law and was now offering, generously, to call it off for the price of everything I owned. And my daughter's name was on the thing he'd filed. That was where I made my mistake. You had Sarah sign it. It came out before I could stop it, not the soft, fumbling voice I'd worn for 4 months, but my own, flat and hard and 40 years sure of itself. The voice that closed deals. You walked my own girl into a lawyer's office to swear her father's mind was gone. The line went quiet. Not a long quiet. A second. Maybe 2. But I'd spent a lifetime listening to men across tables, and I heard it for what it was, a careful man recalculating. The slipping old fool he'd built his whole plan around had just spoken in the voice of the man who'd sold a company for $1.2 million. And Brandon Cole had heard it. When he came back, the warmth was a half shade too even. I know it's a lot to take in, Ray. We'll go slow tomorrow. Get some rest. Then the sentence that told me the rest. I'll come by early set up. Make sure everything's comfortable for you. Set up. Make sure. He was coming early to look. Because the old man had just proved, on the phone, that he was sharper than a slipping mind has any business being, and a careful man checks a thing that won't sit right. I thanked him warmly, hung up, and sat very still. Then I called Marcus, and I told him the truth. I broke character, I said. He used Sarah's signature on me, and I let it land, and I answered him like myself. 4 months careful, and I threw it away over one sentence. I made myself say the rest. That one was mine, nobody else's. I did that. Marcus was quiet a moment. How bad? He's suspicious. He's coming early to search the house. He as good as said so. I rubbed my eyes. So when he does, we let him find something. 1 device. Not 3. 1. And then we don't do tomorrow. Marcus said it plainly. The way he said things he meant. We have enough. The recordings, the trail, 2 victims on record. We move tonight, and you never walk into that room. It was the sensible play. The safe one the way Ed Weston and the accountant had been right in 1994 on the paper in front of them. But the paper had changed, so I think it through, I said. I fold now. And what's the picture? A confused old man who taped his own family, who panics and lawyers up the night before a simple signing. That isn't a man who's well. Marcus. That's their Exhibit C. I back out tonight. And Brandon walks me into that hearing in 18 days and wins it clean. There's no safe door left. The only way out of the trap is forward through the one room where he still talks. Marcus was silent a long moment. And when he searches, let him sweep that room tomorrow and find the one I'll leave sitting there for him, and walk out feeling like the smartest man in Houston. A man hunts for the trap he can picture. He never looks for the two he can't. I looked toward the dark hall, toward the green notebook on the nightstand. Brandon's pride is a lock, and tomorrow I hand him the key and let him open his own mouth. The one man a con artist can never run his game on is himself. Marcus let out a slow breath. Then we proceed. God help us both. I didn't sleep. I made coffee at 5 the way Carol taught me, measuring by feel, and walked the house and checked each recorder one last time, the lamp base I'd leave sitting out for him, the ceramic bookend by the kitchen, the hollow base of the clock on the mantel. All three live, exactly where they'd sat for 4 months. I moved nothing. Let him find his one. I'd known this kind of quiet twice before. The morning I sold the company, the morning after a doctor said pancreatic in this same house. This was the third, the clean stillness that comes when a man has prepared everything a man can prepare, and there's nothing left but to let the day walk up to the door. I stood at the dresser before the photograph Carol in Galveston, laughing with her eyes near shut, caught unguarded because she never knew I took it. My favorite picture of her, for that exact reason. Today, I said, at 9, the doorbell rang. Brandon arrived at 9 exactly. He'd dressed for it, a charcoal suit, cut better than anything a working man owns, shoes polished to a shine. The good leather briefcase he only carried when he wanted you to feel something important was about to happen. 2 men came in behind him. James Whitfield, a notary, mild, 50-ish, reading glasses on a cord, a handshake soft as a folded napkin, and Michael Reed, whom Brandon called a senior associate at the firm that would manage my assets, early 40s, trim, with the blankness of a man trained not to ask questions about the work that pays him. I shook both their hands and offered coffee, moving through my kitchen with the careful step I'd worn for months. Then Brandon did the thing I'd been waiting up half the night for. "Ray, you'll forgive me." He said it lightly, already crossing into the living room. "After we talked last night, I got to thinking I want this to be just us. Comfortable. No reason for anybody to feel watched in his own home." And he began, casually, to move through the room, lifting the edge of a cushion, turning over the mail tray, his hand drifting along the bookshelf like a man only straightening up. He reached the lamp. He lifted it. He turned the base to the light, and there it was, taped in the hollow where I'd set it 4 months back. The room stopped. Whitfield looked up. Reed's pen went still. Sarah, just settling in beside me, drew a breath. A man's whole plan can hang on a single second, and this was mine. I did the only thing left. I let my face fall open, not into the sharp man who'd answered him on the phone, but into something old and frightened and ashamed. That's mine, I said, and let my voice shake. I forget things. Brandon, conversations. I lose them by supper time, so I tape them and I play them back later. I looked at my daughter and made myself say it in front of her. I didn't want anyone to know how bad it's gotten. Beside me, Sarah made a small, broken sound, a woman watching the thing she'd signed her name to come true in front of her. The room held its breath. Brandon turned the little recorder over in his fingers, watching me, and I watched him do the arithmetic and choose, at last, the most flattering answer, the way he always did. A frightened old man taping his own breakfast wasn't a threat. He was a diagnosis. Oh, Ray. Something almost gentle moved over his face. Pity. It was the worst thing I have ever had to stand still and receive. That's exactly what we're here to take care of. He slipped the recorder into his jacket pocket and I let him. Let my one decoy go. Let him leave certain he'd swept my house clean. I'll hold on to this. You shouldn't be doing that to yourself. Sarah's hand found my arm. She thought she was comforting a sick man. I have never felt smaller than I did then, 2 real recorders still running in that room, and me having bought my own daughter's pity with every last shred of my pride. And the recorder in his pocket wasn't just gone. It was his now. One more page for the hearing. The old man so far gone he'd wired his own kitchen. He'd come to sweep my house and left with a fresh exhibit, handed to him in my own shaking voice. But it worked. That was the thing. The guard came down off Brandon Cole all the way to the floor. I'll say this for him, the competence was real. There was a genuine gift in Brandon Cole. Bent its whole length toward the wrong end of things, a man with that much patience rarely needs to steal. He simply decides to. For 2 years, I'd hated that gift. That morning, I was almost grateful for it. A careful man's habits are the easiest thing to turn against him. He set up at my table, briefcase open, one folder to the center, pen laid square to the edge. He walked me through it. Easy and expansive now, an investment structure to hold my assets. A grant of authority he called limited and protective. And his favorite, a provision for continuity of care. Should a day ever come when I couldn't decide things on my own, the beauty of it, he said, is that you won't have to follow the details. You hand me the weight, and you stop worrying about any of it. You just let me carry it. You just let me carry it. With my daughter 18 inches away, and 2 recorders he'd never found taking down every word, and Sarah, I said gently. She understands this better than I do. I expect. Sarah trusts me to handle it. She doesn't need to get into the weeds. That's what family's for. He said it lightly, with her sitting right there, and I felt her go still beside me. The way a person goes still hearing the thing they've worked hard not to hear. He slid the first folder across. Several pages. A signature line at the foot of each. The notary's seal already stamped and waiting, patient as a held breath. I held it close to my face, the way a man does whose eyes have begun to fail. I read 2 pages slowly and set them down. This is quite detailed, I said. It's meant to be comprehensive, so there are no gaps. So you're protected. Ray. Completely. He said my name the way he always did often, on purpose. He'd read somewhere that a man's own name softens him. I looked at Whitfield. I looked at Reed. I looked at Brandon. I picked up the pen. I held it over the signature line. Brandon's breathing changed the smallest lift in his chest. Beside me. Sarah went rigid. The kitchen got so quiet I could hear the clock on the mantel. I looked at the pen a long moment. Then I set it down and reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out something else entirely. I set a small black recorder on the table, no bigger than a thumb drive. I laid it between Brandon's folder and the pen he'd squared so carefully, folded my hands, and waited. 3 seconds. His smile held beautifully, professionally, but the eyes above it had stopped agreeing with it. And I'd spent 64 years reading the gap between a man's smile and his eyes. Just, Ray, what is that? The mate to the one you found in my lamp this morning, I said, and slid so carefully into your pocket. I watched that land. You should have wondered how many a careful man makes. This is the second. The third is still running, right now. Somewhere in this room you won't think to look. The smile finally left him. And here was the thing I'd counted on. The thing 4 months of shuffling and forgetting had all been for. He looked at that recorder and reached, on instinct, for the weapon I'd hung on the wall for him. Ray. Gentle, grave, pitched for the room. Whatever you think you've got, you have to understand you haven't been well. We've all watched it. A recorder hidden in an old man's lamp. Secret tapes of his own family. He spread his hands. Sorrowful. That isn't evidence. That's the illness. No court in Texas listens to a word of it. There it was. The exact lie I'd spent 4 months building for him. Laid brick by brick. Handed over now without his ever guessing I'd left it on the wall on purpose. And he was right about one thing. A confused man's homemade tapes. A good lawyer throws out by lunch, which is why I had never once meant to win this with tapes. I brought my own folder up from under the table and slid the first page to James Whitfield. The color drained out of him as he read Marcus's summary, the forged documents in front of him. 3 prior Texas cases. The federal file by number. The papers you came to notarize are forgeries, I told him. You're not a target. Keep it that way. He took off his glasses, set them down, and said nothing more all morning. Michael Reed stood. Brandon put out a hand without looking. Sit. Reed sat like a man counting steps to the door. I slid the second page to Brandon. Harold Simmons. Dates. Account numbers. $420,000. I know about Harold, I said. Austin. San Antonio. The 2 men you lined up after me. 18 months of it, and paper on all of it. I let it settle. And every soul at this table just heard you spend 40 minutes walking a man you believe is senile through the theft of all he owns. That part's not on any tape. Brandon, that's in this room. In their ears. The front door opened. Marcus came in first. Behind him, a woman with a badge open in one hand. Agent Torres named the investigation, named Brandon in full, and told Whitfield and Reed that each would give a statement before he left. Brandon pushed back from the table, and for a moment, the thing under the suit showed itself. The thing Carol had felt across a dinner table 2 years before any of us had a word for it. Not panic. Calculation. Gone cold and flat and reptile. You sad old man, he said, very quietly. Just to me. The warmth scraped down to the bone. You have no idea what you've started. I have some idea, I said. Then, because for Sarah, it could not end on my word against his. Marcus set a player on the table and pressed it. Brandon's own voice filled the kitchen. This room, 3 weeks back low, easy. Telling Sarah how her father would never grasp the size of what he was signing. Her breath caught. It was her own evening. 3 feet from a conversation she'd let herself call concern, then a second clip. A phone call my device had caught months gone. Brandon relaxed, talking to someone I'll never know. The old man's further along than I'd hoped. And then the line that took the floor out of the room. The daughter's the easy part. She doesn't want to understand it. She wants somebody to take the whole thing off her hands. That's the reason I picked her. It answered the question I'd carried since the night I opened Carol's notebook, the one I'd hoped. The way Carol hoped. To be wrong about. He hadn't fallen for my daughter. He'd shopped for her. I made myself watch Sarah's face. I owed her that, not to look away from the thing I'd chosen to make her hear. She had gone white and still, hands flat on the table, eyes fixed on a point above the window, the way you look when you're holding yourself together by main strength. Brandon turned to her. "Sarah, you know me. This isn't what it sounds like. I was protecting your father, protecting both of you." She didn't turn her head. When she spoke, it was barely a sound. "Brandon, stop talking." Then, to Torres, in the same flat voice, the last thing left in her she could still command. "I signed his petition, the conservatorship. I want it undone today, whatever that takes. And I'll testify to every word of this." Torres stepped forward, and Brandon stopped. The room went quiet, not the held breath quiet from before, but the other kind, the quiet of a thing that is finished. Brandon looked across the table at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, the performance was simply gone. And what sat under it was smaller and older and far less sure of itself than the man who'd come through my door at 9 with a leather briefcase and the certainty that he'd won. I'd been holding every card since the first handshake. He'd only now turned his head and seen the table. They took Brandon out the front door at 11:43. I know the time because I looked at the clock on the mantel as Torres and her partner walked him past the kitchen doorway. He went without being pulled, even with his wrists held. He carried himself like a man leaving a room of his own accord. It was the last performance I ever watched him give. Whitfield was already gone. A short statement, and then out fast. A man who'd come to stamp a seal and nearly stamped his own name onto something that would have followed him for life. Reed left 2 minutes behind, recalculating every choice that had brought him to my kitchen. Marcus spoke low with Torres by the door, then put a hand on my shoulder, said he'd call tomorrow, and left me to it. And then it was just Sarah and me. She hadn't moved from the table through any of it. Her hands were in her lap now, and she was looking at the little black recorder Marcus had left behind, like it might still have something to say. I made coffee, not because I wanted it, but because my hands needed a job. I set a cup in front of her. She didn't touch it. "How much did you know," she said, "about what I'd done?" "All of it. Marcus found the petition 10 days ago. Your signature on it." She nodded, slow, like setting down a weight that would have to stay where she put it. I keep going back to the night I signed," she said, her voice even in the way Carol's used to go when she was carrying something heavy across a thin floor. "He sent it to me to sign as next of kin, and I sat on the couch with my phone, your number up on the screen. I was going to call you and just ask. Straight out." She stopped. "Then I told myself you'd be upset, that Brandon knew the law and I didn't. So I put the phone down, and I signed a paper that said my father had lost his mind, and I went to bed, the 4 hours I'd wondered, since Marcus told me, what was inside them. Now I knew. That's the part I can't get past," she said. "Not that he fooled me. I had the phone in my hand. I wasn't deceived at the end. I chose not to know." "There's a difference," I said, and I didn't soften it. "And you've got it right." She flinched, but she didn't look away. She took it the way her mother would have, and then she lifted her eyes, and something in them had turned, found an edge, but you let me believe it. Quiet, steady. All those dinners, you forgetting, asking me the same thing twice. I sat at that table and watched you slip, and I grieved you. I cried in my car in the clinic parking lot because I thought I was losing my father. Her voice didn't rise. It hardened. And it was an act. You let me bury you a little, every week, so he'd believe it. You used my grief to bait your trap. I didn't reach for a single thing to put in front of it. There was nothing to put. Huh? Yes, I said. I did. He had to believe I was failing, and the only way he'd believe it was if you did first. So I made you grieve a man who was sitting right across the table from you, whole the entire time. I made myself hold her eyes. It's the cruelest thing I have ever done. And I did it to the one person I was trying to protect. You can be furious at him and at me both. Sarah. You'd be right on both counts. She didn't argue it. That was the worst of it. She just looked at me and let it be true. After a while, she said, quieter. Did I ever love him, or did I just love being allowed to put it all down? You tell me. After Mom, I was so tired. Dad. He said, give it to me. I'll carry it. You don't have to think anymore, and I handed it over, because I wanted to stop carrying it that badly. I don't think I loved him. I think I loved being let off. Her eyes filled and held. And he was right. That was the easy part of me. He didn't even have to invent it. For 8 months, I'd arranged every piece on the board, until Brandon had one move left. Now I sat across from my own daughter with nothing arranged, no recorder, no folder under the table, no plan worth the word. The man who'd held every card that morning held not one that counted here. And for once, I understood I wasn't meant to. This wasn't a thing to manage. It was a thing to lose, or be given. And the choosing wasn't mine to make. I'm not going to tell you it's fine, I said. It isn't. I'm not going to tell you it can't be, either. I'm going to be here and let you decide how close you ever want to stand to me again. She stood, picked up her bag, and went to the doorway. She stopped there, her back to me, like there was one more thing and then there wasn't, or she couldn't find it. And she went out into the bright afternoon. Everything in me wanted to go after her, to fix it, to arrange one more piece. I made myself stay in the chair. For a proud man who'd spent a lifetime handling things alone, letting her walk out that door unmanaged was the hardest thing I did all that day, harder than Brandon. Harder than any of it. Out the window, the oak stood full and green and dead still in the heat. I just had to wait now, in the quiet, and see which way she'd fall. The 3 days after were the quietest I'd known in 8 months. No dinners to write down, no recorders to check, no performance to hold up off the floor with both hands. Just the house and the ordinary noise of a Tuesday that became a Wednesday, that became a Thursday, the mockingbird in the oak, the coffee in the mornings, the late May light long and gold across the kitchen by the time I finished my first cup. I didn't feel like a man who'd won anything. I'd thought I might. Through the months of getting ready, I'd pictured the day after as lighter, clear, the clean satisfaction of a job done right after a long haul. What it felt like instead was tired, not the kind a night's sleep takes care of, but the kind that gets down into the bones from holding something complicated a long time and then setting it down, so your hands don't quite know what to do anymore. On the 3rd morning, I made Carol's soup. The recipe was in the notebook, but she'd written it the way real cooks do, half the steps left out, because she'd assumed whoever read it would already know. I didn't know all of it. I made it anyway. Slow. Stopping at every line. Making my own call where her instructions ran out. Hoping I'd called it the way she would have. The kitchen filled with the smell of it. The smell it had on Sunday mornings when she was alive and cooking, and the house felt lived in the right way. I stood there and let it make me sad and grateful at once. In some proportion I couldn't have named, but that felt exactly right. I was eating a bowl of it when Marcus called. They charged him this morning. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy, financial elder abuse. 3 counts. His lawyer's already asking for a continuance, but Torres says the case is iron, and nobody on her side is inclined to be generous. I thanked him. 2 more things, he said. One good. Since the charges went public, 2 people came forward on their own years back. Never said a word, too ashamed like the rest. They saw his name in the filing and picked up the phone. You broke the quiet he was counting on. Ray. It's coming apart. And the other, the lawyer's flatness went out of his voice. When Torres's people mapped the whole pipeline, there were 4 men in his orbit. 3 we reached in time early enough. Nothing signed. He stopped. The 4th was a man named Walter Kessler. 73, out past Katy. Widower, no children, nobody who came by. Brandon had finished him 8 months ago. By the time the file crossed Torres's desk, the accounts were empty, structured the same way Harold's were. Past clawing back. He's alive. He just has nothing. And there was no one in his life to notice it happening. A pause. That's why Brandon picked him. The no one. I held the phone and didn't say anything for a while, somewhere in the back of all that planning. I'd let myself believe that if I ran it clean enough, I'd get them all that careful, and right would be enough to reach across the whole board. Walter Kessler was the part of the file that didn't care how careful I'd been. Some of them you reach. Some were already past any hand's reach before you ever heard their names, and you don't get to choose which. Daniel had told me as much, in his own kitchen. I just hadn't let it land until it had a name on it. I went back to my soup, because there was nothing else to do with it. And the soup, at least I could finish. I'll admit one thing. Every time the phone lit up those 3 days, some part of me hoped it would be Sarah's name. It never was. The quiet of those mornings had that one thin crack running through it. And I left it alone and waited. Daniel Simmons called at 4 that afternoon. They reopened my father's case, he said. Careful, like a man carrying a full glass. A detective out of Dallas called my mother yesterday. The federal case against Cole gave them new grounds. There might even be a shot at civil recovery, down the line. He stopped. My mother cried. Not all from happiness. She said it was the first time in 2 years she felt like anybody had taken what happened to my father seriously. That's worth a great deal. Daniel, I said. How are you doing? Not the case. You, a pause while he chose the words. Getting there. But there are still days I go to call him before I remember I can't. They get shorter, I said. Not all the way, but enough to live in. He was quiet. Then, how did you do it all those months? Watching it and not saying a word. I'd have blown it in a week. I had something to be angry at, I said. That helps. But more than that. I had something to protect, not the money. My daughter, and something my wife left me. You have to be angry enough to stay patient and love something enough to stay careful. When both are true in a man at once, he can wait a long, long while. Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. My dad would have liked you, Mr. Hutchins. I set the phone down and sat in the long afternoon light. The bowl was empty. Harold Simmons worked 38 years and never missed a payment and died not understanding how it had gone wrong. Walter Kessler was alive tonight in an empty house with empty accounts and no one to call. They'd both done the right thing their whole lives and gotten somebody else's arithmetic for it. I didn't reach Walter in time. I'd carry that with the rest. I washed the bowl and set it in the rack to dry. Tomorrow was still coming. That had always been enough to get me to the next morning. Even now, even with one name still missing from the phone, Torres called on a Friday morning, 10 days after the meeting at my kitchen table. I was out back when it rang. Over the strip of ground along the south fence where I'd been thinking about a garden. Nothing planted yet, just measuring the light, working out how much sun the spot caught. Mr. Hutchins, a few things to bring you up to speed. She walked me through the dull parts, first evidence, chain of custody, the Dallas and Austin offices folding the old cases in. Then the thing she'd called about. The 3 men we reached in time are clear. No documents signed, no money moved. They each know now what was coming, and we've put them in touch with legal help. They keep what's theirs. A pause. Her voice changing the way a professional's does at the part that never gets easier. Mr. Kessler is the other story. We're doing what can be done, victim services, civil options. But I won't dress it up. That money's gone, and it isn't coming back. I stood in the yard with the sun on the back of my neck. I know, I said. Thank you for telling it straight. You pulled 3 men you'll never meet back from the edge. Mr. Hutchins. I've worked this a long time. 3 is a good number. It's just never the number you wanted. We hung up, and I stood a while without moving. 3 men I'd never met stood in their own yards that morning. Savings whole. Lives still their own. They'd come within months of what Harold Simmons learned, and would never know how close it came. Never know my name, and that was fine. The best part of it. And a 4th, out past Katie, sat in an empty house running the same arithmetic Harold ran. And no garden of mine would ever grow green enough to make that even. I'll tell you what I felt, because it surprised me. Not triumph that's loud and burns off fast. The other thing, quieter and more durable the plain, incomplete satisfaction of a man who set out to do a hard thing and did most of it about as well as it could be done. Most. Not all. I was learning to live inside that word, and underneath it, the piece that wouldn't sit right. I'd reached into strangers' lives and pulled 3 back from the edge. The one person I'd most wanted to save, I couldn't engineer a single thing for. With her, there was no plan to run. Only the waiting. I went inside and called Marcus. He liked a diner near his office, good eggs, and nobody there knew him for a lawyer, and tried to hand him their troubles over breakfast. We met that Tuesday at 8, a corner booth, and for 40 minutes said nothing about the case. We talked about Houston, how little of it either of us recognized anymore, and about gardens Marcus had kept a vegetable patch 11 years, and had opinions about which varieties Texas soil rewarded and which the seed catalogs lied about. Then he set down his coffee. "Can I ask you something personal?" I told him he could. Why elder fraud? When I started, nobody was my colleagues thought it a backwater with no money in it. I believed them about a year. Then I took a case that changed my mind, and I've done this ever since. Or what was the case? A woman in Galveston, 74, taught school 37 years. He took the slow breath a man takes before a thing he rarely says. Her own son moved every dollar she had into his accounts, a little at a time, over 18 months. He wasn't desperate, he just wanted it. When we finally laid it out for her dates, numbers, the whole picture, she wouldn't look. She kept saying the same 4 words. But he's my son. But he's my son. He paused. The boy never spent a day answering for it. Statute, paperwork, her refusing to testify. She died 2 years later, still calling it a misunderstanding. It was the only way she could carry it. I sat with that. It was Sarah's road, the one I'd hauled her off by main strength in that kitchen. The door marked, but he wouldn't. The 4 hours. The easier lie. I could have stood where that Galveston mother stood, said, "But she's my daughter." Looked away. Let the not knowing be a kindness to us both. She'd walked all the way down that road and never come back. Her son out there to this day, unanswered for. And in that booth, I understood a thing I hadn't let myself say. The hardest part of those 8 months wasn't trapping Brandon. It was making Sarah hear it. Refusing her the one mercy that woman had taken, never quite knowing. I'd done it on purpose. I only understood now what I'd been pulling her back from. I couldn't reconcile it either. The first time, Marcus said, "I've gotten better. But that case did something to me that's never fully undone." I told him about Carol then, the notebook. What she'd written about Brandon a year before I saw it myself, caught the whole shape of it, set it down in her small, careful hand, and run out of time before she could tell me. Marcus was quiet a moment. "She sounds like a remarkable woman. I wouldn't have done this without her. Not this way. I wish I'd known her." I looked out the window at the bright, ordinary morning going by. "I'm glad she knew me," I said. "That feels like the truer way to think about it." We finished the eggs, shook hands on the sidewalk, and went our separate ways. I drove home through streets that had started to feel like mine again, familiar. No longer something a man braces for. 3 people I'd never met still had their savings because of 8 months of my life. A 4th didn't. Both rode home with me. And I'd stopped expecting the books to balance. It was enough to get up for. It was just the one name, still missing from the phone, that kept it from being all of it. She came on a Saturday morning, 5 weeks after the meeting at my kitchen table. It was longer than 3. I marked every day. I didn't call, and I didn't go to her, though my hands reached for the phone most evenings. She'd asked to decide for herself how close she stood to me, and the one thing I could give her was room to do it. For a man like me, giving room uses the same muscle as lifting a car off the ground. I used it anyway. I was at the window with my first cup when I heard her engine. She knocked she hadn't in years, and I understood what she was telling me, that she knew she'd given up the right to walk straight in and wouldn't take it back without asking. She didn't bring pastries. She brought a folder. She set it on the table between us before she sat. "That's my statement," she said. "I gave it to Agent Torres on Tuesday. Everything what I knew when I knew it. The night I signed his petition. and I filed to withdraw the petition myself, in my own name. My lawyer said I didn't have to do it that way, that I could let it quietly lapse. I told him I wanted my name on the taking back, the same as it was on the signing. She looked at me. I'm not here for you to tell me it's all right. I came to tell you what I've done, and then go keep doing it. I looked at that folder a long moment. It was the most like her mother she had ever been. That's not the easy part of you talking, I said. No. Her jaw set. I'm trying to be done with the easy part of me. It's slower than I thought. Nobody warns you how much heavier your own life gets when you finally pick it back up. There it was, the thing I'd hoped for, and hadn't let myself expect. For 2 years, my daughter had handed the weight of her life to whoever would take it. Now she'd brought a folder she didn't have to bring. Her name on the worst thing she'd ever done, and she was carrying it on her own back. We sat with coffee. Some of the old smallness came back a few minutes. The mockingbird had built a second nest in the oak, which seemed greedy. Then the small things ran out. The way they do. I was angry at you, too, she said. For a while. The dinners. Letting me grieve you across this table when you were fine. I'd get to the clinic parking lot some mornings and just sit there furious at you for what you'd let me feel. She turned her cup in her hands. I worked it through. I'm not saying what you did was right. But I understand now you didn't have a clean road either. There wasn't a version where nobody got cut. No, I said. There wasn't. I'd take the cut off you if I could. I can't. I'll be sorry for it the rest of my life. And I'd still do it again to save you. Both are true at once. She nodded slowly. She could hold 2 true things at the same time now. That was new, too. What do I do, she said. To get back to where we were? We don't go back to where we were. I said. Where we were is how we got in. We build something that doesn't have that door in it. I held her eyes. And you show up. Not when it's easy, when it's hard. And you don't feel like it. Over and over. For a long time. That's what it looks like from here. I can do that. I know. Trust isn't a thing I can hand you today. It's a thing you'll build in front of me. One ordinary morning at a time. She didn't ask for more than that. She didn't try to close the whole distance in one reach. She finished her coffee, said she had somewhere to be a meeting. The first of a few. She didn't say what. And I didn't ask, and at the door she laid her hand against my arm a moment, the way she had as a girl, and went out into the light. No long embrace, a hand, and a beginning. It was more than I'd had in 2 years, and I didn't grab for an inch past it. 3 weeks later, Brandon Cole stood in front of a federal judge, pleaded guilty to all of it, and was sentenced. Marcus called that morning while I was in the yard. 6 years. Parole possible at 3.5. He traded a cooperation deal he's giving them Dallas and Austin. A pause. And the conservatorship's dead. Formally. You were never anything but competent. Ray. On paper now, too. I thanked him and ended the call, and stood with the phone in my hand, looking at the tomato plants along the south fence. I'd started them from seed. The way Carol always swore was more satisfying, even though it asked more of you. 6 years. Harold Simmons worked 38 years, set aside money every month from the time he was 27, and never took a dollar that wasn't his. He got no years at all. He got a chair by a window and a son who watched him fold quietly inward until there was nothing left to fold. I don't know what justice is supposed to look like, I'd half expected a cleaner answer by now. I didn't have one, and I still don't. A courtroom hands you arithmetic 6 years, 3.5, and the arithmetic never balances against a man in a chair by a window. A thing you grow from seed is a different kind of accounting. That one comes out right if you keep showing up to it. Every morning. The same word I'd given Sarah, and that she had, at last, started to give me back. I knelt and put my fingers in the soil around the nearest plant. It was dry. It needed water. I went to get the hose. I found the last page of Carol's notebook by accident, on a Saturday evening in June. I'd been going through the nightstand drawer again, one of those evenings when sitting still feels worse than moving. The back cover lifted from what I'd taken for the final page, and behind it was one more, a single sheet folded flat against the cover. Thin enough I'd passed over it every time. I worked it loose and unfolded it. Carol's hand. The same small letters tilting right. No date. Not written to anyone the way she wrote when thinking something through on paper. She'd written about me. Not Brandon, not Sarah, not the money. About who I was, what she'd watched in me across 40 years and valued. The stubbornness that looked, from outside, like patience. That in all our years, she'd never once seen me decide out of fear, only out of principle. Even the times it cost us. And then, near the bottom, I don't know what's coming. But I know he'll meet it the way he meets everything. I am not worried about him. That is the most honest thing I can say about loving Ray Hutchins for 40 years. I stopped worrying about him a long time ago. Not because nothing bad can happen to him. Because I know what he is made of. I read it twice, then I set the notebook flat on her side of the bed, where she used to lay her own book before the lamp went out, and put my hand on it, and sat a long while in the dark, grateful past words that the woman who'd seen the danger coming a year before I did had seen to the bottom of me and trusted it. And here is the thing I couldn't have told her the day she wrote it. She was right that I'd meet it. But I very nearly didn't. The man she trusted to handle anything had spent a lifetime handling everything alone. And that pride was the one crack the thief found. What carried me through wasn't the part of me that needed no one. It was the part that finally learned to call Marcus, to let a federal agent into my kitchen, to sit across from my daughter and let her decide. Carol trusted what I was made of. What I was made of had to learn. At 64. The one thing it had never known. The phone rang the following Tuesday. Sarah. By then, she'd been showing up for 2 months. Not smoothly. There were Saturdays heavy with everything we weren't saying. An afternoon she left early because neither of us could find the floor. A couple of calls that ended thinner than they started. But she kept coming. She'd stopped disappearing when it got hard. Dad, I have something to tell you. A weight set down carefully. I enrolled in nursing school, the evening program. I start in September. I've already moved my clinic hours around it. I let the quiet sit, so she'd know it landed. That's the right thing, I said. And I thought, though I didn't say it of all the lives she could have reached for, she'd chosen the one where you carry other people through their worst hours. A year ago, she'd tried to hand her own weight to anyone who'd take it. Now she was going to school to pick up everyone else's. She hadn't just come back. She'd turned the whole way around. I'll be the oldest one in the room most days, she said. You'll be the most prepared one in the room most days. You know things that don't come out of a textbook. Your mother would have been happy to hear this, I said. A pause. Her voice going soft and careful. The way a voice goes when something reaches a room shut up a while. Do you think so? I know so. She talked about your nursing plans all the time, back when you first had them. She'd be proud of you now. Her breath caught. Thanks, Dad. We talked 20 more minutes about ordinary things, which is the whole prize. Once you've come close to losing them. After we hung up, I opened Carol's other notebook, the recipe one, with the soup and pot roast and all the Sunday things. And on the blank page at the back, I wrote the date and 3 words. She came back. I didn't write the rest. That she came back different. That we both did. That what we were rebuilding wasn't the old house, it was a new one, without the door he'd walked through. 2 weeks later, I was at the counter of a coffee shop near the house when the man on the next stool said, "Excuse me, are you Ray Hutchins?" Late 60s, solidly built. The careful posture of a man whose trade never forgave mistakes. A kind face, carrying something, but carrying it well. "George Patterson," he said. "I was told that if I ever got the chance, I ought to thank you in person." I knew the name before he finished. One of the 4. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "Maybe not." But I wanted to say it anyway. We sat an hour. The heat. The hopelessness of growing anything edible in a south-facing yard in June. Our daughter's his in Austin. My Sarah and her September start. The silence a house takes on after a wife is gone. He'd had 31 years with his Louise. She'd loved birds, the way Carol did. I didn't tell him about the one who hadn't been so lucky the name Torres read me from her file too late. The man whose money was gone before I knew to reach for him. George had gotten the good ending. Not everyone in that file did. I let him have his hour without that shadow in it. When I left, I sat in the car a moment before I turned the key. Some things you lose, some you protect, and some the best ones you pass along without ever knowing you're doing it. Just by living the way you decided, a long time ago, to live. I started the car and drove home. The first tomato came ripe on a morning in late summer. I'd started those plants from seed in the spring, the way Carol always said to. And there were weeks I doubted any would take. That morning, one had gone full and red on the vine, heavy enough to pull the branch down a little. I picked it, stood in the early heat with it warm in my hand, and carried it inside. I sliced it, salted it, and ate it standing at the counter where I've stood most mornings of my life. It tasted like something I'd grown. That was all. That was plenty. The house doesn't sit as quiet as it used to. Sarah comes by not for an occasion, just on a day she has off. She has a key again, and she uses it. We don't always have much to say, and that turned out to be the thing I'd missed most without ever naming it, the ordinary nothing talk of a person who belongs in your kitchen. Last Sunday, she made the pot roast. It still missed Carol's by an inch. And this time I told her so. And she laughed. And we worked out which spice she'd been leaving out. We'll get it. We've got time now. That's where things stand. I'll let you make of it what you will. But I want to say a few things to you directly, because I don't think this found you by accident. If you're someone who spent a life doing things the right way, who paid what he owed, kept his word when it cost him, built something slow and clean, then somewhere along the line you've been treated like that makes you a mark. Like decency is the same as weakness. Like a man who won't raise his voice can't raise his hand either. Hear this from someone who learned it the hard way. What you built through integrity isn't in your bank account, where they can reach it. It's in you. No document. No smiling man at your table. No amount of patient pressure can remove what you're made of. That doesn't mean nothing bad can happen, it can. It did. It means you are not the soft target they've decided you are, and you are allowed to fight back. On your terms, with your head, without becoming the thing you're fighting. I won't pretend it came free. I lied to people I love. I sat at that table and let my own daughter believe she was watching me come apart, and I'll carry a piece of that the rest of my days. Anybody who tells you the right thing is the easy thing is selling something. It isn't easy. It's just right. Most days that has to be enough, because it's all you get. And there's one lie I want to take off you, because it does the most damage. They'll try to shame you not for being robbed, but for being fooled. I've watched what that shame does to good men. It seals their mouths. It can make a man defend the very person bleeding him, because admitting it feels worse than the loss. So hear me, being fooled is not the failure. Honest men get fooled, because honest men assume the next man is honest too, and that isn't a weakness. It's the best thing about you. The failure is the silence after, the looking away. If it's happening to you, or you only suspect it, say it out loud, to someone, today. That silence is the one thing the man across your table is truly counting on. Which brings me to the last thing, and the truest, and the one that took me longest to say. I did not do this on my own. A year ago, those words would have stuck in my throat. I spent my whole life proud of needing no one, and that pride was the exact door the man at my table walked through. What saved me wasn't my own cleverness. It was a warning my wife left in a drawer. A lawyer who'd seen it before and knew it on sight. A woman with a badge who cared enough to do it right. A daughter who finally chose to listen. The ones I couldn't save, and there were some were the ones who had no one. I've met their sons. I've read their files. If I could carve a single line over every quiet man's door, it would be this: don't be alone with it. The thief needs you isolated and ashamed. Refuse him both, and you're already harder to take than he believes. I'm an old man, and some evenings out among the plants, I let myself imagine Carol had a hand in how it all came together. Maybe she did, or maybe it was only that she knew me well enough, before she went, to leave the warning where I'd one day find it. Either way, I wasn't left to face it alone, and I've decided that's the whole of what a person can really ask for. So here's what I'll ask of you. Before you go, leave a word below and tell me where you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this has traveled and who's out there tonight. And if you know a man who builds things quietly and honestly, and who's begun to wonder whether anybody sees it, send this to him. Tell him an old man in Houston said he is not as alone as he feels, and not nearly the easy mark they take him for. Then go and find the one person you've been carrying something alone in front of. Say it out loud to them. That's the part that matters more than the verdict, more than the money. I'm only sorry it took me 64 years and a thief at my own table to learn it. I'll be here. The coffee's on, and come Sunday, Sarah's coming to try the pot roast again. I'm not alone in this kitchen anymore. I hope, wherever you're sitting, that before long you won't be either.